We are back. We are the coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Media Network. Here in the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. We just told one about our good friends at Dirk's Barbecue, who later on this month are having a benefit for Hurricane Harvey victims. It's going to be a hell of a night. Music, booze, rock and roll, all in the friendly confines of their restaurant on Thayer Street. Appointment, listening, eating, drinking is everything you need in life compressed into just a few hours. As the Grateful Dead would say, too much of everything is just enough. But joining me right now is someone I'm proud to call my good friend. His name is Sam Bell. Sam, of course, is most widely known as one of the founders, former chairman of the Progressive Democrats of Rhode Island. Sam and I had date night last night at what I refer to as Halitosis Hall. All respect to Rudy Cheeks, or otherwise known as Mordor, which of course, as you know as Smith Hill, Rhode Island's State House. We spent a lovely 4 hours together in a sauna, waiting for and watching perhaps one of the most ignominious displays of political bloviation in my 56-year history, as we were treated to an endless parade, sort of like a clown parade, of mayors, executives, charlatans, mayor charlatans, executive leader charlatans, clowns, hangers-on, coat hangers. I can use every political cliche in the book. They were all there last night to pay deference, homage, if you will, to revere the great one, the Larry Lucchino, as I like to call it, the billionaire baseball boys club attempting to inflict on us his wet Fenway dream. But those are my words, not the words of my guest. Of course, if you're a sentient human being in Rhode Island, you know that last night was the first night of the road show, a.k.a. Rolling Thunder, a.k.a. the listening tour. Except what we found out last night, Sam Bell, was that they weren't going to listen to us, much like 2 years ago. We got to listen to them.
Yes, it was really shocking, actually. Typically, when you have a legislative hearing, you have both sides, and they both talk. Sometimes there's a pre-testimony where they arrange a certain set of speakers from both sides. They have a first panel and a second panel. Typically, those speakers speak for a longer period of time. They give more full testimony. They get more questions from the committee. That's how it normally works. Typically, though, if you're going to have pre-testimony, that pre-testimony goes in with both sides. Mm-hmm. Here, it was 3 hours, more than 3 hours, basically, of testimony. Not arranged by the committee chair, but actually where Don Grebian, the mayor of Pawtucket, was calling the witnesses, which was a horrible violation of procedure. And they offered no chance for dissenting views. And they said it was going to be a full and open vetting, a really thorough vetting, and it made a mockery of that. It was embarrassing. I think a lot of the senators knew that, and I was truly shocked, actually. Mm-hmm. Conleys, someone I've always thought is a very responsible, respectful, and intelligent chairman. Someone whom I may not agree on everything, for instance, on a woman's right to choose, but typically is a fair guy. And I was really surprised, actually. I was genuinely shocked. I've always thought of him as someone who's very fair, who runs a good committee, and it was a really weird deviation from that, and I don't understand what happened.
Yeah, I was last night.
It doesn't make sense. Conley's not the kind of person who does something like that. So I was really surprised, and I don't think it came from Senate leadership. I think it came from Conley. I think he just made a weird call. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make sense. I don't know.
Do you think he didn't understand Many people in Rhode Island are at a point in their lives where they're so cynical relative to government. One or two or three reactions has taken place. Number one, they've washed their hands of it completely because they assume that it's so fundamentally corrupt, so intellectually corrupt, and so stacked against them that it's not even worth their time. Many of those same folks are really worried about just getting through the day.
I mean, it is true, actually, and I think people downplay this, but it is like really gross to deal with the political system in Rhode Island. It makes your skin crawl, and it's really unpleasant. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, those are not concerns to just laugh off. It's not like a crazy thing. It's like, you spend time in where politics happens in Rhode Island, and it is not pretty. It's not the kind of thing that one normal people feel comfortable with. So it still makes my skin crawl all the time.
Yeah, many of us felt last night we needed to take a shower afterwards for two reasons. And one, the stultifying, oppressive heat.
Well, they still have about 4 working showers left in McCoy's.
Right, exactly, with mold. And then, of course, there was a philosophical shower you felt you needed to take. Because frankly, the emotion that came to my mind, I wasn't so much angry as I was embarrassed. You know, it
really was embarrassing. Mm-hmm. You know, it was embarrassing also some of the people who really should have known better. Mm-hmm. And I want to point to Mayor Jorge Elorza here. Mm-hmm. Now, yes, I know in his testimony he was very careful to say he just supports the Paw Sox and doesn't support the specific deal. He's one of those people who just carefully edged away from saying he supported the specific deal, but hinted and implied that. Even so, that was clearly what was intended to be implied. He knows better. Mm-hmm. He claims after the fact that he opposed the last stadium deal in Providence. If he has any principle, then he should oppose the same one in Pawtucket. Take Don Grebian. Don Grebian used all the right arguments about public money, etc. when there was the Providence proposal, but now he's behind the same proposal. It's hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. People should know better. Now, Grebian, of course, is famous for hypocrisy, but there are people like Jorge Elorza who genuinely should know better. And there's certainly a fair criticism of Elorza, but I was genuinely shocked to see him there. Mm-hmm. And I will ask him about it, because it doesn't make sense. It's not a reasonable, respectful thing to do. Also, Donna Nesselbush.
Right.
Donna Nesselbush is fundamentally too much of a reasonable person to be promoting the deal in the way that she is.
Right.
You can kind of tell that she doesn't necessarily believe in it. Personally, I got that sense. In the hearing. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it's still surprising to me. And that's what I think is embarrassing. You have people who really genuinely should know better. In some cases probably do know better, and are still participating in this because there's a sense in Rhode Island that you go along with things that have been anointed.
Is the word charade too much of a strong word?
I don't know if it's too strong a word. Maybe it's probably too strong. I don't know if it's fully a charade. I mean, to be fair, I feel like the committee did listen to my testimony. Mm-hmm. And they took some points seriously. And I thought a couple of senators asked genuine questions. One of the interesting things is Senator Seveny and Senator Felak.
I thought
both
stepped up.
Perceptive questions, and I don't know that they're necessarily going to be supporters of the deal.
Right.
Maybe they will be.
I was particularly impressed by Felak's questions because he seemed to be, once the gushing was done, particularly with regard to Secretary Pryor, he seemed to be the one eager to drill down to the details.
I thought Seveny asked the best question when he started off with the question about maintenance.
Okay,
which I mean, Felak asked a good question, but Seveny's question about maintenance, where they said that they maintain McCoy now, and they're going to maintain it going forward, is crazy. I mean, to say that they've been maintaining a stadium where you're looking at showers not working?
By their own testimony.
Right. They've failed if that really was their responsibility. And of course, they've been saying for decades that, it's the state has to pay for all the maintenance. Mm-hmm. It's not our responsibility. So I thought that was a really important question. And it was one of the times when they, as I've been saying a lot, and I try and be careful and delicate in politics, as one knows. There's been an increasing trend, I think, in politics where people do this tactic where you say something that's very false, but you just go with it and just say it with a lot of confidence. And that seems to be a big part of their selling strategy. And I think it's wrong. But I was really surprised to see how much of that was on display. How many times they just did that, say things they know are false and just went with it.
Well, you had... the Pawtucket Foundation was represented there last night, but the gentleman who also happens to be the chairman of Colette Travel, at the Cumberland hearings, the representative of the Pawtucket Foundation uttered a blatant falsehood, which accomplishes a couple things. Now, when that happened, she maintained that according to, implied, I should say, inferred, because when they make these statements, as you so deftly put it, they never come out and absolutely say it. It's all about the nuances, the shading of the words. So she implied and inferred that there had to be a private-public partnership between the community, that in fact was how the league operated. Now, if you're me, you're somewhat taken aback. At Cumberland, I had already spoken, so it wasn't like we were in a setting where I could engage in debate, but they allowed that to be put out there. And quite frankly, the next morning I called league headquarters and challenged that assertion, and very quickly got a statement back that was, in politics we call it a falsehood. We might use the term prevarication. I'll call it a lie. And if unchallenged, a full day went on between that. I did not see her make any attempt to retract that statement. So I think you're right. There's a tendency to throw out some economic nonsense, some half-truths, some assertions, and if they stick, great.
And even if they don't, right, it obfuscates and confuses the real issues here.
Right.
One of the things I thought was really interesting in the hearing, I thought that people in the committee were most interested in a lot of the legal arguments about what was actually in the legislation and what the legislation actually did, which is very different from how it's been portrayed. And, for instance, I think people were genuinely surprised to learn that the cost overrun guarantee is not in the legislation. The ticket tax, which a lot of people seem to have not heard of, but was one of their earlier selling points that they now, I think, dropped.
Kind of.
They say
Maybe.
No new taxes is a new selling point.
Right.
But the ticket tax was like a big part of the revenue projections, and I think like a really important thing for the deal, this surcharge. They say it's, quote, expected in the legislation, but if they've dropped it, it's weird to still have that in the legislation, so that's not in the legislation. And similarly, and I think hopefully we can try and get General Treasurer to testify at one of these hearings. I think that'll be really important to get his legal analysis. But, when I read out the part of the legislation, I think basically binds the state to pay Pawtucket's debt, which was, of course, a big issue because the governor said that was a deal breaker for her.
Right.
It really does seem like the state is compelled to pay Pawtucket's debt. And text of the legislation is pretty clear. So I thought that was interesting. And one of the interesting questions I have is how we respond to the way the hearing is structured. Because you can't go to another hearing like that. It's not worth anyone's time. You can't ask Rhode Islanders to show up, and I hate to tell people to not show up at things.
Well, we were out in the hallways where most of the business is really done at midnight, and there were a few folks there who were elderly, besides myself, and and you could tell the night had taken the toll on them.
It took a toll on me too.
I mean, but these folks, these folks were there out of a genuine. There's a genuine concern to their presence. Not that we don't, but these are grassroots people who woke up that morning and said, "You know what? The hell with it. I'm going, and I'm going to make my point heard." And they were denied that opportunity because of this travesty.
Yeah, and honestly, and Conley, I hate to do this. I had a rather heated discussion with him afterwards, or during the hearing, and he claimed that the anti-McCoy crowd, the tear it down crowd, were the principals in the deal, and so they deserve a right to speak when other people didn't. And I don't know. I was really shocked by it. It still sticks with me that it's just not how these things typically go. I just felt it, and he maintained that that's how he's going to operate all the hearings going forward. So it's just going to be 3 hours of pre-programmed testimony. It's not public testimony, and by the time the press has left,
Right.
and most people aren't really listening, it's not worth it for to ask people to come if it's just going to be a sham, and they aren't really going to go and do a serious vetting and a serious hearing. So I don't know how one's supposed to respond to that. The sort of total lack of desire to operate this in a real manner. Because you can't ask people to come to a hearing like that. I wouldn't go to another hearing like that.
It's really shocking, the in-your-face nature of it. Not so much that it was confrontational, but the sort of blasé indifference to what was clearly a highly choreographed, manipulated
State
appearance.
senator testify who was in the room. State senator was in the room during, and she typically you allow a state senator to testify. She came into the room. She tweeted afterwards that because they're still ongoing in the pre-testimony period, the presentation from Grebian and the other tear it down people, the anti-stadium, level it, rebuild it crowd, with a bunch of our public money crowd, and she, that is not normal behavior. It's not normally how hearings are supposed to be run.
Well, the other thing that I found appalling, and particularly from Pryor's perspective, this has been going on for years.
Here's the other thing. Stefan knows this is a bad idea, I think.
Yeah.
He knows it's a bad idea. He knows it's a bad deal. He's one of the people, I think, personally, who understands it's not a good idea. I think the governor also does not think it's a good idea. And one of the reasons you can tell that is that they refuse to give up any of their money that they control through commerce towards this deal. And I think that's telling. And I think it's part of the evidence of why they think it's a bad deal. Now, one interesting thing that does exist, and I think is still on the books, they have the ability to basically, through the TIF program, just do an administrative repair of McCoy without even going through the legislature. It'd be very hard to stop politically. So they do always have that option that they've got in their back pocket. And I think that's ultimately where we end up.
A repair of McCoy?
It's got to be where we end up. Yeah, I do think it's worth talking about what the right way to solve the problem is, because it is true that there are problems that need to be solved in McCoy because it hasn't been maintained, and so the roof is leaked, and then so there's massive water damage everywhere. It's bad. It is the fault of the way the deal was set up, but it needs to be fixed going forwards.
But as you pointed out last night so aptly, that is emblematic of just about everything Rhode Island does. There's very little attention.
Has done in the past 30
Right.
years or so.
Right.
There was a time when our state did pretty great policy and put down a lot of good things and built a really great state. During the 50s and 60s, with the exception of a terrible mayor in Providence, the state was not that badly run.
Right. But
Under the curve and speakership, got a lot of good things done in Rhode Island. And a lot of that, interestingly, I as you know, I'm a progressive. Part of the irony is a lot of what built this state is the work that McCoy did.
Well, and now speak to that, because you're clearly, I've known this before, you clearly always have historical, I'll call them anecdotes, but connections to be made to past administration. So you're a Rhode Island history buff. Talk about McCoy for a second.
Tommy McCoy is this fascinating figure in Rhode Island history. So he's this guy. He got started when the Republicans ran Rhode Island. One of the more famously corrupt political machines that America has ever seen. Part of the Republican control over Rhode Island came because the municipal voting legislation still had a property ownership requirement. Right. So Republicans held control of Democratic cities because renters couldn't vote.
Right.
And so what that meant was that there was this huge effort to break that law and to give everyone full voting rights. When that came through, it completely cracked open Pawtucket politics. McCoy, who'd risen up through Pawtucket politics, one of the first Democrats ever elected in Pawtucket to the General Assembly, he ultimately became Democratic floor leader, where at the time he worked out a deal with Republicans. One of his main victories, and when he was in the minority leading the Democrats in the House, was the first estate tax in Rhode Island. So that's a key core part of his legacy that he was able to achieve when he was in the minority. Then he came in, and in Pawtucket, this was back before primaries. So he helped build, he ran, ultimately wound up running the political machine in Pawtucket. But that was how Democratic politics worked. And one of the great things that McCoy did is he was one of the people who said, you know what, we need primaries. We can't just pick all our Democratic candidates in the back room. We have to have a fair decision about who these people are. We have to have elections to figure out what the candidate the party's going to put forward. So he fought for that, and he would fight against the machine picks for candidates. And to the point where once he refused to support a Democratic candidate for Congress. Republicans pick up a congressional seat because McCoy was so upset about the backroom procedures. And he fought really hard on the line for core reforms of the party. His biggest and most famous campaign is, of course, something that he lost. But Rhode Island is much worse off now that he lost it, which is relates to public ownership of utilities. So the utility companies were growing an increasing amount of power, and of course they're monopolies. And private monopolies are very dangerous, and McCoy argued persuasively that they should be public services instead of private monopolies that continually screw over taxpayers with, as we've seen with the massive rate hikes time and time again with the current PUC, they're running wild. And McCoy wanted public ownership. And he fought hard, and the state Democratic machine ultimately defeated him on that. But that was one of his really hard fights. Where his legacy really came into real power, though, was in Harry Curvin's speakership. One of the Democratic representatives in Pawtucket that McCoy helped initially pick and handpick and get elected was Harry Curvin, who ultimately wound up as the Speaker of the House for the longest speaker in a while, a very long speakership. And during the Curvin speakership, we saw things like the Fair Housing Ordinance, or Fair Housing Law pass. We saw we really saw Rhode Island start to build a real state, build out more progressive government structures, more progressive tax structures, grow out public services, and really build the economy. Of course, at the time, there was still the hardcore conservative mayorship in Providence, which the state was wrestling with. So it was a time when ironically, the state government was reasonable and the city government was driving the state to the ground. But you have to look to his legacy for a lot of the great things that we have in Rhode Island. And the time in which the Democratic Party in Rhode Island actually functioned, was a real Democratic Party and really worked. And that was because you had a mayor in Pawtucket who was willing to go out there and fight against the powerful political machine and said, you know what, we need reforms, including we need primaries, which is a battle that ultimately was won. So I see him as someone who helped put the Rhode Island Democratic Party back on track for about 20, 30 years before the hardcore conservative people started to seize control starting in the early 80s.
Without going too far afield, people like DeAngelis and their ultimately, and the progression of speakers post that, the Harwoods and all that, where do you think they'll stand the test of time?
I mean, look, I don't know how history is going to necessarily view them. I think the reality, though, is that they're people who both represented a shockingly weird political experiment of running extremist conservatism within the Democratic Party. Not so much DeAngelis, but Harwood. It's a weird experiment to run very hardcore right-wing policies within the Democratic Party. It's, I guess, interesting in a morbid sense, but the devastation it's done to the state is awful. I mean, what's happened to the state economy? You're seeing a state with people fleeing it, with massive economic troubles caused by terrible public policies. It's a really sad legacy, I think, and as much as it's an interesting political story, I think it's a much sadder human story. And I fundamentally believe Rhode Island needs to break the machine and return the Democratic Party to the much more normal, reasonable party that was actually largely built by Tommy McCoy.
Flash forward to 2017, you've got yet another private-public partnership, or shall we say a twisted version of it, being presented where we again socialize risk at some level and privatize profit.
Right.
That seems to be the recurring tale of woe here, on every level.
Well, I mean, it is a common occurrence. I don't think that's the fundamental problem in Rhode Island, but it's more of a symptom of the disease.
Right. Somehow tied into all of this is either A, whatever we're calling the, Commerce Corporation at this point in history, or a governor / speaker that has put up for sale, private tax breaks, private equity, breaks, investment breaks. What's it going to take to disabuse Rhode Islanders of the notion that on so many levels, that type of 38 Studios / Paw Sox / Alpha Beta / fill in the blanks on so many Capco Steel / where we continue to invest state money and put state money at risk for, in my testimony, I pointed to the lack of core competency in state government to adequately assess
I think it's
risk-reward.
something that Rhode Islanders, by and large, really don't support at all. To a large degree, and I don't want to oversimplify it, but to a large degree, the problem is just the governor. Raimundo came to office, I think, on the idea of advancing sort of ideological conservatism as, what she was bringing to the table. And I guess the way it's largely manifested itself is in a lot of kind of very old school patronage-oriented politics where they're about controlling money and power and not about trying to grow the state economy. One of the weird things, if you had a normal business conservative running Rhode Island, you would imagine they would look at cutting regulations. And there are actually places in Rhode Island where, such as planning regulations, they actually are too harsh. And actually do restrict growth. And you don't see that out of Raimundo. And what you just see is the whole economic development strategy is just here. Take public money.
Right.
It's nothing like in Massachusetts where it's about building place, making strategic investments in public infrastructure. And Raimundo resists that. I mean, for instance, she didn't want to put up the money for the Newport North End project bridge realignment. Pied Weed had to fight like that. Like hell for that. And ultimately, there was it was largely federal money arranged by David Cicilline that paid for that. She was reluctant to put up that cash. She's been very reluctant to pay for basic public infrastructure stuff. That's why there's that curve on Gaynor Street that still hasn't been straightened out.
Well, and you look at Massachusetts, and the Massachusetts model seems to be the flip side of that, where you're where you're providing at some level public infrastructure support, and
people say we have to do all these massive subsidies because every other state does it. No, that's just not true. Massachusetts, they always point to Massachusetts and say Massachusetts does all these big subsidy deals. That's not really true. They do public infrastructure subsidies. Right. They do some direct cash subsidies, but it's way more limited. It's way smaller. They do other things, like they do brownfields renovation. We don't have a state brownfields renovation economic development program, so we have all these blighted sites, like Apex and Division Street, that need brownfields cleanup in order to become good economic development parcels, and that just doesn't happen. So we have problems with brownfields renovation. We don't do a lot of the basics, the sort of placemaking kind of stuff that works so well in Massachusetts. But there's a time when Massachusetts did more subsidies. They give out 50-year tax deals. But they moved away from that, and all of a sudden, the state economy started growing a lot faster.
Well, and what's used so often as an example, of course, is Gillette Stadium, where, by and large, Kraft put up his own money for the stadium, and the state invested in improvements to Route 1.
And Tom Finneran fought hard against the investments to Route 1. I mean, he said, and they nearly went to Connecticut with a massive deal to build the whole thing publicly.
Right.
Because Tom Finneran didn't even want to put up the public infrastructure. Which was, that was a strong stance to take. But by and large, the Massachusetts legislature doesn't want to do this kind of stuff. There may be a couple corrupt municipal governments in Massachusetts, but not that many.
Well, and look at the Paw Sox attempt to leverage Worcester as their go-to location. There hasn't really been any serious conversation surrounding the
Putting up public money, no.
and just it's not coincidental that the public chatter that you and I know is so often planted in various aspects of the media has ceased almost completely with respect to its potential relocation to Worcester, because the appetite is simply not there to put up large-scale public investment.
Yeah.
Without, again.
And yet they say the whole thing is, if we, opposing this deal means wanting the Paw Sox to move out of Rhode Island, which is crazy.
Well, but again, you were there. It's the negativism. Your folks like us are painted as being negative, and that's why I pointed out that negativity saved the state.
We're not the ones who want to tear down the stadium. We're not the ones who are saying no. We're the ones who are saying say yes to what we have now and invest in it and make it work. And yeah, maybe we do want to get a deal that's better for the taxpayers. Maybe we do want to make sure that the team is on the hook for maintenance so that somebody actually fixes the roof so the whole thing doesn't leak.
Maybe after 2 years of conversation, we want them to attend the first hearing armed with facts and something approaching what will be the final legislative product. I mean, that to me was a disappointment. For the terms to be as nebulous, for so many of the claims to simply not exist in the form of the actual legislation, at this point in the conversation is just highly disturbing to me. We're looking at it being postured that this has to happen. Of course, the rush being generated. I mean, this is unlike going to a car dealer who tells you, that car may be gone tomorrow if you don't buy it now. It's to be approaching the end of September.
You work in the car industry, don't you?
Of course. That's why I know it so well. Listen, I'll never forget the conversation I had with York on WPRO when he was talking about that it was only $120 million. And I said, Dan, would you buy leather if it was only $10 a month extra? That's what they've just done to you. It's September 15th, the year 2017. I'm treated almost daily now to Facebook memories from 2 years ago when we were having the same conversation about then the deal to go into Providence. Those have all kind of passed in the last few weeks. I'll use the same analogy I used to the Trumpers when it comes to their alleged health care reform. They've had 8 or 9 years to come up with their replacement, their idea to either fix or replace Obamacare. In both cases, you should be able to go file, open, Word, recent document, click, print. Anything less to me right now, in my personal opinion, my humble opinion, as they say on the net, is unacceptable. How you're still not willing to commit to writing your nebulous promises?
The legislation was truly shocking. I mean, one of the fun, I guess there's a thing in politics I've learned a lot more, is you just put something in a glossy report, and then it's different from the actual legislation, and often you can just go with it. It kind of works.
Why bother doing the nitty-gritties?
It's kind of crazy. I remember when I first started looking at campaign plans during the last governor's race. I remember Raimondo put out a proposal to pay for school construction by scooping out .5 of the money that we already raise from the sales tax. But we already are spending that money. You can't just double count money. I remember Tavares put out a proposal on pre-K that involved scooping out pre-existing Title I funds, which would be devastating to the city of Providence's finances if they scooped away that money. And then, of course, his pre-K program had a math error in it, and the cost was actually more than twice what he projected it to be.
Well, how important it is to today's politicians to look like you're attempting to solve the problem as opposed to actually solving the problem. I mean, how much of this is in a not so far bygone past, they would have called these trial balloons. Now they put them up as serious policy initiatives understanding that under the short attention span that is American politics, so little of this is actually. I mean, I sent this guy McNally, who works for Commerce Corp, who is
He doesn't work for them. He just has
What-
fun on the board,
right.
on the investment committee.
Right. Yeah. Here's a guy who made his bones, admittedly. This is he publicizes this right on his Twitter feed, and he aggressively attacks people for his Twitter feed. So I'm not divulging a confidence. He made his fortune working as the CEO of Skanska, which is one of the poster childs for big government construction. Big profit, big government construction that's funded in any way possible because American government is actually a construction management company. Anything these taxpayers and the real citizens' needs are merely inconveniences. I sent him an exhaustive study done on football teams and private-public partnerships, compromising a number of years. That was done, I believe, actually by, I want to say, the Texas or Colorado government. And for once, it wasn't funded by, like, the firm Last Night, who blew it on the Ryan Center. It wasn't funded by the people actually looking to get the money. It was an independently run, arm's-length academic function provided by a state university, which meant it was actually probably fairly accurate. And again, they came up with the now almost prototypical conclusion that there is no direct correlation between ancillary development and the placement of a stadium. And in fact, often the presence of the stadium acts as a negative on the downtown business scene. And yet, time and again last night, you had sophisticated business people, smart, to your point, smart people who are accomplished, people who have
And people who know better.
right, and
People who know better.
come out with the same canard, but based on the see, they've never been forced to debate it. They get up, make the speech, and then leave. Mayor McCheese was there, and I love him to death, but he went up and made the speech.
Who's Mayor McCheese?
Oh, McKee. As my former mayor in Cumberland, we call him Mayor McCheese, all right? Because he's, the lieutenant governor.
He is.
He makes this broad, sweeping pronouncement and never has to actually substantiate any of his claims. Because we don't have to do that anymore. We can just say these things and wave the magic wand, pixie dust comes down, and yes, you can fly. I forgive me, but Pryor's inability in the first session, the most publicly watched session of this charade, this road traveling Broadway show we're about to engage in, he's telling me, well, at the next session we'll have the points. Well, you're being asked them now. And you're being asked them not just by activists, but you're being asked them by a sitting senator in the Senate Finance Committee. And he or she, whoever they may be, has a right to know that now. This isn't a work in progress anymore.
Yeah.
So I forgive my frustration too, but
Well, it is frustrating. It's frustrating to have killed a deal like this and have something similar come back that people just weren't listening. No, that is frustrating. It's deeply frustrating.
But if you look at casino development, I think personally they've learned a lot from the Twin River people in one sense.
Spend a gargantuan quantity of money.
Right.
That was Twin River's. It's funny, Twin River almost lost in Tiverton because a couple of Tiverton residents started knocking on doors. They spent $6 million on that campaign, which is crazy. It's absolutely insane. It should be illegal.
Well, that's why, and by the way, on this show we call it Twin Riverton now, because it is a company town. So
Twin Riverton?
Yeah, in Newport, you had a 30-year track record in an organization that was well-run and had the time.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that.
They scoreboard.
I wouldn't agree with that.
Well,
I wouldn't
well-run
agree with that.
or articulated?
Not well run at all.
They
were a casino. It had financial problems. It was.
But they managed. Okay, I look at scoreboard. They managed to hold off yet another. I'll call it Glenn Close has played prominently today. Certain scenes from Fatal Attraction have been replayed and replayed. They managed to hold off the landlord of this building, as it were.
Oh, I see. The people in Newport defeated
Right.
them. I don't think the casino there is well run.
Oh, no. I'm talking
I
about
see.
the opposition.
Yeah. Well, Dawn did a great job, and now
Right.
she's a state senator.
Right, and that's one of the reasons why she's been publicly acknowledged now for the leadership role that she's worked for.
Right.
That and marriage equality. No, I'm talking about, got to know the people at the opposition.
Right.
The Panalino organization, the landlord of this building, was comical and inept.
But there was no way they were going to be able to win that in court.
Well, there was backdoor attempts made to, and if it wasn't a constitutional issue, if they could have wiped off the Newport vote as easily as they're attempting to wipe off, until you guys caught it, the eminent domain issue, if they could have legislatively eliminated that Newport requirement,
Oh yeah, then it would have happened.
then there would be a casino being constructed right now in Newport.
Right. That's true.
In fact, the only thing, in my personal opinion, because I'm as anti-casino as I am anti-stadium subsidy, that the only thing that's prevented it from exploding across the state was the fact that every single time a community voted for it and was given ample time to actually consider it, it wasn't shoved down their throat with a multi-million-dollar ad campaign from the gentleman who runs Twin Rivers. It's been voted down in the local community.
Yeah, I'm not anti-casino. I would support a good casino proposal. We just haven't had one.
I
don't think that gambling should be illegal.
Oh, I'm a libertarian. I think it should be completely legal. I object to the state monopoly on it, and I object philosophically to government using games of chance and trickery to obtain their revenue. So that's as a libertarian.
The other interesting thing people didn't talk about with the Twin River thing, that's just a personal gripe of mine. Nobody's giving money to the Poconoket. The Twin River in Lincoln gives money to the Narragansett, but they built in Poconoket land a new casino, and there's no revenue stream that's going to the tribe.
Well, you know, as you know, as I said last night, in the halls of justice in the halls. It's a question of who hired Guy Default this time, who got Guy Default next time, or any one of a number of connected lobbyists, who got Harwood, who got Default, fill in the blanks. Whoever that lobbyist du jour is, there's about a dozen of them. And, you know, it's a question of rooting for laundry. You know, and in one case, the guy strikes back in his earlier career as a reformer, and now he's a paid lobbyist fighting payday loan reform. You know, by the way, the presence of the Woonsocket mayor last night in support of this shows me that there's no there. For Woonsocket of all towns to support it is breathtaking to me. Why would you support, in Cumberland too, I'm kind of giving all up on hope on our mayor, but in Cumberland in particular, or Woonsocket, or Central Falls, why you would support the presence of an economic behemoth acting in direct competition, and I know this is my obsession, but again, fundamental economics, direct economic competition to the burgeoning restaurant scene in Central Falls and less so in Cumberland. Why you would support that, I have no clue. I don't, again, they've been sold a bill of goods that this ancillary, that magically the streets are going to just, in fact, I can see them. As soon as the construction of the stadium is complete, you'll see gradually the streets turn to gold. And people will magically leave a building that is designed to keep them inside, designed to monetize stadium traffic, designed to spin people out directly to their cars and directly home after the event is over. Why they would support that, for the life of me, is astonishing.
Well, Lisa Baldelli Hunt is not someone who I think is a good mayor.
You and I would agree on that.
Good.
I mean, she's...
I will say this for Lisa Baldelli Hunt, though. She is better than the Woonsocket Council. I'll say that for her.
Well, I mean...
And the council is so absolutely, completely insane that she really is sometimes a voice of reason within a completely crazy echo chamber.
That's a good way to look at it. But at the Cumberland Town Council meeting, we were treated to the speech by the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce, who supports this, of course. Reading the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce letterhead is looking who's of corporate welfare cases. Listening to him talk about the growth in the Blackstone Valley and living there and walking the streets of Central Falls, Cumberland, and particularly Woonsocket is an out-of-body experience. Because here is an individual, lovely gentleman, so fundamentally disconnected with the realities of life in Northern Rhode Island, that, it's appalling. I'm not quite sure what he thinks is going on. I'm not quite sure what Blackstone Valley he lives in, but CVS contributes little or nothing to the city of Woonsocket and the city of Cumberland. When challenged with even a slightly higher rate of participation by Governor Chafee at the time, I believe it was, it threatens to leave right away, much to the. So God forbid we should allow or create an environment where organic economic growth takes place. Again, we have to buy it. We are convinced, we are the Stockholm Syndrome city. We are convinced that for you to like us, we have to pay you.
Yeah, that seems. I mean, that's how a lot of it's happening. It's sad, but I think that we can move past it.
So,
with new political leadership.
I appreciate you coming in tonight. What's the next step? I mean, you and I have talked a bit about this, but there's been a strong progressive Democrat presence at the first two hearings. I can include the Cumberland Town Council in one of them. You folks showed up to there, to your credit. You guys have done a lot of original digging, to your credit. Is there going to be that same force going forward in the next two meetings?
I don't know if it's worth showing up at the hearings if they're going to be like the last one.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we need to make sure that there are enough votes in the Senate to pass it.
Right.
And that means talking to senators and convincing them it's a bad idea. I don't know that going to a hearing is all that productive if you can't actually present in a reasonable way. If they won't listen to you, why go?
So
why dignify it? If it's going to be run like that hearing, why dignify it?
No, there's a point to that. What ultimately the individual voter who listens to this show now or who listens to it in the future,
Call your state senator.
that's where the action is at.
Call your state senator. Yeah. Call them and ask them their position and ask them to commit to opposing this deal.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you need to do.
Because the absence of any real organized opposition on that Senate page led the Providence Journal to conclude that, in fact, at one level, that it wasn't exactly positioned as a clear endorsement, but the absence of a lot of anti-opposition on that page was posited as a potential. Well, people seem to be in favor of it, and I have to tell you, outside of the folks who have a direct connection, I don't know of anyone who actually believes this.
No. I mean, look, it's not a particularly popular policy.
Mm-hmm.
I think people know that. I think people also question whether people we're gonna go and start canvassing the speaker's district again or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, imagine if the speaker were to start supporting it, then yeah, that would happen. At the current stage, it's probably best to just make sure that there aren't the votes to pass in the Senate. Make sure they don't try and try and ram it through. I think they'll struggle to. There could easily be 13 votes to block it in the Senate. Would not shock me. So
local, it's still, all politics is still very local.
yeah, call your state senator.
And really, here's the thing: you don't have to show up at a protest. You don't have to sit in a sauna for 4 hours, only to be, in my case, interrupted by. To me, what was astonishing about my experience there, I don't know if you caught that, but after listening to the pros for 4 hours, I had 4 or 5 pages to read. Well, damn it, I've spent a lot of time on it. I think I invested in the process. I think I should be given the opportunity to say my speak. About 2 pages into it, someone actually interrupted me and said, when are you going to let someone speak? Really?
Was it a senator who did that?
No, it was actually he was shut off by Conley, but it was someone affiliated with the pro position.
I don't like the idea that they're the pro people. What they're really doing is very negative. They're saying, tear it all down.
They're the negative people, aren't they?
Yeah, they're not pro stadium. They want to tear down the stadium. If you want to tear down the stadium, you're not pro stadium. You're not supporting it. You want to tear it down.
You're pro cronyism.
Yeah.
Listen, I appreciate the effort and that you're putting in your organization. Cheers.
Cheers.
Right.
And I apologize for the lack of sleep I got last night, which may have been reflected in my ability to put together words. So.
No, it was, as always, bracingly, refreshingly, politely confrontational, but at the same time, you have your facts lined up. So
Thanks.
I enjoy going into the trenches with you guys, and again, the point I'll always make is we don't agree on everything.
No, we don't.
But there's a lot that we can accomplish working together let's take care of some of the low-hanging fruit, take care of some of the obvious issues, and then you and I can have some arguments about this or that. But in the meantime, there is so much to be done that we need to move beyond partisan divides and just stop this and a few other things. One of the things I'd like to talk to you about once this little maelstrom passes, you and your organization, is the warrantless searches of the prescription medical database system.
Well, that was crazy.
I'm as a civil
Progressives
libertarian.
fought it pretty hard in the legislature, most of them. Some didn't. Very disappointing.
My senator didn't show up that night, Senator Pearson. I had a conversation with
Well, he
him.
took a walk. I suppose that's good.
I had a conversation with him on this show. He was very nice enough to come on and spend an hour or so with me. It's a conversation I hope to continue. I have a working relationship with him now, I feel, and then, I'll make him aware of, because now he is a senator. He is not he may be a Democratic name, but he is the senator representing my district. And there are people who feel very strongly about
Well,
issuing
it's
these
a deeply
issues.
Republican bill.
And as a civil libertarian, it's one of the most appalling things I've seen in its own way cross the governor's desk in a generation.
I think that's too strong. There's been some awful legislation.
Well, yeah, but if you're a civil libertarian, if you truly believe, and this is where we'll agree to disagree probably, but that type of invasion, that type of suspension, if you will, of civil liberties, to me, and again, my
It's
perspective.
bad. I think there's been some pretty awful legislation that's passed in Rhode Island.
Listen, one night we'll have a conversation. In fact, let's put up a poll on Facebook. What's the worst thing the legislature's ever done besides 38 studios?
Tax cuts for the rich. Undoubtedly. There's no competition. Tax cuts for the rich, worst thing the legislature's done.
I would love to see from
My
your
view.
group, once this is all passed, and this is whack-a-mole. There will always be other issues, and that seems to be the challenge. But that's a conversation that's absolutely worth having, the tax structure of this state, because
Repeal the tax cuts for the rich. Just repeal it. Bring the top rate back up to 9.9. Everyone says that we don't have enough money, except we find magic money to do things like this new stadium deal. But there's a place where we used to have the money, and we suddenly have massive budget problems after we slash taxes for rich people. We should just repeal those tax cuts, and then we'll have revenue again. And maybe the state won't keep crumbling because we won't keep making, failing to make the investments that we need.
well, let's have a conversation about that.
Sounds good.
All right.